I love you both so much. This is amazing.
Before the story begins, subscribe. Because moments like this happen more often than people realize. They weren't expecting bad news. Not even a little. Everything felt completely normal. Like any other routine appointment, nothing out of place. Nothing to worry about, so when the ultrasound started, they were calm. Just watching the screen without a second thought until something felt off. It wasn't obvious. Nothing dramatic or immediate, just a subtle shift. A quiet change in the atmosphere, but enough to change everything. Arrival. It was just another appointment. One of those routine visits you barely think twice about. And honestly, nothing felt different at all. No signs, no strange feelings. Just a normal day unfolding exactly the way they expected. Beginning, the ultrasound began like any other, quiet and familiar. With that soft hum filling the room as the lights dimmed just enough to make the screen easier to see. The technician moved with calm precision, like someone who had done this 1,000 times before. And for a moment, it all felt almost routine, comforting even. Then the screen lit up, casting that pale glow across their faces, and they leaned in just slightly, curious but relaxed, expecting nothing more than the usual images, the usual reassurance. Everything seemed fine at first glance. Just shapes and shadows slowly taking form, nothing alarming, nothing that would make your heart race. They exchanged a quick look, the kind that says, "See, it's all okay," and for a brief moment, that belief settled in. But there was something about the silence that followed, not heavy, not obvious, just a little longer than expected. And even though everything on the surface appeared normal, that quiet pause lingered in the air, almost unnoticeable, yet impossible to completely ignore. The feeling, but then, almost without warning, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, there was no sudden sound or visible alarm, just a quiet, almost imperceptible change in the atmosphere that made everything feel slightly off. Something didn't feel right, even though nothing on the screen clearly said that anything was wrong. It wasn't something you could point to or explain out loud, not even to yourself, just a subtle hesitation, like a thought that forms but never fully becomes words. The room was still, the same soft hum in the background, the same careful movements, but now every second seemed to stretch a little longer than before. A glance lasted half a beat too long, a pause lingered where it normally wouldn't, and in that space, that tiny, fragile space between certainty and doubt, a feeling began to grow. Not panic, not yet, just awareness, the kind that creeps in slowly, gently, almost politely. As if it doesn't want to disturb the moment but ends up changing it anyway. It was just a moment. Nothing more on the surface, something most people might not even notice. But to them, it felt different in a way that was impossible to ignore, like something unspoken had entered the room, settling quietly between everyone there, and even without words, without confirmation, without anything clearly wrong, they could feel it. Looking again, the doctor adjusted the position slowly, almost casually at first, as if it were just part of the routine, a slight shift of the device, a small change in angle. Nothing that should have meant anything. But then they looked again, and this time it wasn't the same kind of glance. It was more focused, more intentional, like they were searching for something they hadn't quite seen clearly before. The room stayed quiet, but now the silence felt different, no longer neutral, no longer comfortable. It stretched just a little too far, filling the space between movements, between breaths. The screen still showed those familiar shapes, the same flickering images, but now every detail seemed to matter more. Every second carried a weight that hadn't been there before. The doctor leaned in slightly, eyes narrowing just enough to show concentration, carefully following something on the screen, tracing it, double-checking it without saying a word. And in that quiet repetition, that need to look again more carefully this time, a subtle tension began to build. It wasn't spoken, it wasn't confirmed, but it was there, growing in the background. Because sometimes, it's not what is said that changes everything, it's the moment someone decides they need to take a second look. The detail, that's when it became clear. Not all at once, not in a dramatic way, but slowly. Like a realization forming in the back of your mind before you're ready to face it. The doctor's expression didn't change much, at least not in an obvious way. But there was a subtle shift, a quiet seriousness that hadn't been there before. The screen still glowed the same shades, the same movement, and yet, something was missing. Not something you could immediately name, not something that stood out to an untrained eye, but enough to interrupt the normal rhythm of the moment. The kind of absence that doesn't announce itself, but instead lingers, quietly demanding attention. The doctor moved the device again, just to be sure, checking from another angle. then another, as if hoping it would appear if they looked at it differently. But it didn't, and in that space between what should have been there and what wasn't, the weight of the moment settled in. No alarms, no sudden reactions, just a deepening silence that said more than words ever could, because sometimes it's not what you see that changes everything, it's what you don't. The truth, and then, gently, carefully, the truth began to take shape, not rushed, not harsh, but impossible to soften completely. The baby had stopped developing. The words didn't come all at once, they settled into the room slowly, as if even they understood the weight they carried. For a moment, nothing else seemed to move. The air felt heavier, time stretching in a way that made everything feel distant and too real at the same time. And the hardest part was that everything had felt normal. There had been no clear warning, no obvious sign that something wasn't right, just days that followed their usual rhythm, small moments of quiet reassurance, a sense that things were progressing exactly as they should, which made this moment even harder to understand, even harder to accept. Because how could something so significant change without announcing itself? How could everything feel so right and still not be? The contrast was overwhelming, the expectation of life, of continuation, suddenly meeting a stillness no one was prepared for, and in that silence, the truth remained, steady and undeniable, changing everything in a way that words could barely hold. And no signs, there had been no signs at all, nothing that hinted something was wrong, nothing that could have prepared them for what they were about to hear. The days before had unfolded just like any others, filled with ordinary moments, small routines, quiet expectations that everything was moving forward exactly as it should. There was no pain that stood out, no sudden change that raised concern, no clear signal asking for attention, just a sense of normality that now felt almost unreal. No warning came to interrupt that feeling, no moment that made them stop and question what was happening. And that was the part that lingered the most, how something so significant could shift in silence, without leaving a trace, without giving them a chance to understand it beforehand. It's the kind of absence that's difficult to process because there's nothing to go back to. No moment where they could say, that's when it changed. Everything simply continued until it didn't, and in that realization, a quiet disbelief took hold. Because they hadn't missed anything, there was simply nothing there to see. Explanation, they explained it gently, choosing their words with care, as if trying to make something so difficult feel just a little more understandable. They said that this can happen quietly, in a way that doesn't always give clear signals or reasons to suspect anything is wrong. Sometimes, everything appears to be progressing normally, the days pass without interruption, and there's no obvious indication that something has changed. And that silence, that absence of symptoms, can be one of the hardest parts to process. Because without signs, without warning, there's no moment to prepare, no chance to anticipate what's coming. It simply unfolds beneath the surface, unnoticed, until a moment like this brings it into view. The explanation didn't erase the weight of what had happened, but it gave shape to it, helped them understand that this wasn't something they failed to see or prevent. It was something that can occur in silence, beyond perception, beyond control. And even though the words were calm, steady, and clear, they carried a reality that was anything but easy to accept. At first, it didn't feel real, like the moment hadn't fully landed yet, as if everything that had just been said was still hovering somewhere distant, not quite reaching them. The room looked the same, the sounds hadn't changed, and yet something fundamental had shifted in a way that was hard to grasp. It was like their minds were trying to keep everything exactly as it was just moments before, holding on to that sense of normality for as long as possible. The words echoed, but without weight at first, like they belonged to someone else's story, not theirs. There's a strange pause that happens in moments like this, where reality and understanding don't arrive at the same time. One comes first and the other takes longer to settle in. And in that space, everything feels suspended, thoughts slow down, emotions hesitate, and nothing quite connects the way it usually does. It wasn't denial, not exactly. It was more like a quiet disbelief, a soft resistance to something that didn't match what they had felt just hours before. Because when something changes without warning, the mind needs time to catch up, and in those first moments after, reality can feel distant, almost unreal. Closured, everything changed after that, not in a loud or immediate way, but in the quiet, lasting way that follows a moment you can't undo. The world outside kept moving like nothing had happened, the same sounds, the same routines, the same ordinary rhythm of life. But inside, something had shifted permanently, not because of what she felt in that exact moment, not even because of the emotions that would come later, but because of what she now knew. Knowledge has a way of reshaping everything, of drawing a line between what was and what can never be the same again. And once that line is there, it doesn't disappear. It stays, subtle but constant, changing how every memory before it is seen, and how every step forward is taken. It wasn't just a moment that passed, it was a moment that stayed. And even in the silence that followed, even in the stillness, that truth remained, steady and undeniable, becoming part of her story in a way that would always be there, quietly shaping everything that came next. If you stayed until this moment, then you already understand something most people overlook. How quiet changes can be. How something so small on the surface can carry so much underneath. Not every story announces itself loudly. Some arrive in silence, in subtle shifts, in moments that almost pass unnoticed but stay with you long after. And stories like this, real, human, fragile, don't get talked about enough. They exist in the background in conversations that never happen, in feelings people don't always know how to share. So if you want to understand more real experiences like this, the ones that don't always have clear signs, the ones that feel ordinary until they're not, subscribe, stay close to these stories, because they matter more than they seem. And if this touched you in any way, even quietly, leave a comment. Sometimes the simplest words can remind someone out there that they're not alone.